Now, would you please join me in giving a very warm New Zealand welcome to the author of Too Much and Not the Mood, Montreal-based Durga Chew-Bose. Hi, Durga. How are you feeling?
A bit nervous.
A bit nervous?
A bit nervous, not too nervous, a bit nervous.
Are you jet-lagged?
Who knows anymore? Who knows? I'm barely cognizant, but I'm very much available to this room today, so.
Amazing. I'm really glad that we're doing this. I feel like this was just a strange sort of turn of events. I knew that you were coming to speak at the Writers' Festival, and I knew I would sort of be in town and hanging out with you, but somebody asked me if I wanted to chair this talk, and I was so happy because I remember you were finishing up the book in Montreal around the same time that I was finishing up Melodrama in New York, and we would sort of have brief moments of checking in on each other or saying hello. And
yeah, it was
so
a
nice.
really good timing, actually. Actually, I remember you sent me a song before it was even finished, maybe?
Oh, I did?
Yeah.
Oh my, what did I send you? Do you remember?
I feel like it was Writer in the Dark.
Oh,
I don't know.
Maybe I sent it to you. Oh, yeah.
And I played it, and I remember you being like, don't play it with your headphones or something. So I was like, okay, I have to find some room to play this in.
Oh,
and
amazing.
it was like, I felt the part where you're singing like that you're your mother's daughter. I felt very connected to that.
Hi, Mum.
So,
My mum was here somewhere.
because
right.
I was
hi.
still in edits on my book, and there's so much in that about my relationship to my parents.
Absolutely.
And to hear someone sort of evoke a similar mood, I kind of was like, okay, I'm on the right track.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. I love that we were sort of in that time together. And I wanted to talk actually about getting our auras read, which I thought would be a nice sort of way to express sort of that time that we spent together. So you talk in the book about going to a place in Chinatown in New York called Magic Jewelry to get your aura read with another friend of ours, but that's something that I did with you as well. Do you want to explain a bit about that?
It's this very kind of, it's not scientific in the least,
No.
which I need to clarify. It's this kind of crystal stone jewelry place in Chinatown in Manhattan, and you get your aura photographed, and it develops into essentially some kind of like rainbowed print.
Yeah, you sort of get a Polaroid of yourself with this halo of color around it, and this very nice young man. Is my headset making a sort of...
I think it's mine. Is it mine?
It's one about... I think it's me because I gesticulate too wildly. I'll
This
just
might be
stay
my
very
earrings.
still.
Should I take my earrings off?
No, they look so nice. Yeah, and this very nice young man sort of explains to you where you are at in your life and, you know, what's going on emotionally. I mean, it's hard to know.
Okay. It's probably mine. Sorry.
And you're right. It's not scientific, but it can be such a sign when you need it. You know, I remember we went together, and he would tired shame us. He would be like, "You are just so tired. I can feel it," and we'd be like, "Yeah, thank you."
Yeah, if your photograph like develops and your face or profile is really defined, for some reason that means you're exhausted.
Yes.
And so the three of us, he was just like looking at us very concerned, as our parents might, you know, with my bags under my eyes constantly, just being like, "You need to sleep," was essentially what we heard.
Yes, but I thought it was interesting in the book. You talk about how yours were often shades of purple or violet in that time, and the bottom third of the book is this purple, and I wondered if this color had been a house for you at that time. For me, I find I will sort of be drawn to a color, and it will be this house that I live within for a season or two, and it will sort of define everything that I make, and then the color will shift. Was that the case with this?
For
It
sure.
was?
I was seeing purple everywhere. I think it was also a return because so much of my book takes place in my childhood, and I remember as a child, purple being sort of very defining for me. Like the sweatshirt I always wore until it smelled bad, you know? Those leggings that were torn. It's very like mark of the late 80s, early 90s too, I think. And so I think part of the book for me was a return to that time, and purple felt really natural to me. And I also think I felt very calmed by it. I'm really sensitive to colors and light, and there's nothing offensive to me about it or too bright, and I wanted to wrap myself around it. But yeah, it's funny, once you decide a color is your home, as you put it, you see it everywhere.
Yes. Yep.
And when I was working on the book, it was everywhere. And then it's that thing, it's like if you tell your friends that you're into frogs, when they travel, they bring you back frog knickknacks. Yeah. And then suddenly you're like, I didn't ask for this. And you have all this like frog crap. With me, it was like purple. Like everyone was just like, I saw this and I thought of you and you should have this because it's purple.
Yes. Oh, that's spoken about in Blue It's by Maggie Nelson,
yes,
right?
exactly.
She says everyone is just bringing her all of this blue from the world, which is so beautiful. Yeah. It's funny, purple was a big color for me in that same season. And it was definitely something that I wanted to sort of put into the album cover and sort of have around me all the time, and then it moved into a lilac. It's like interesting how it moves. But do you have a color right now? What are you living underneath? I know Durga wrote this beautiful piece about a color called Sporty Pink. And I wasn't sure if that was just like a color you were picking up on culturally or if that was your personal color.
I think it was, I wrote that piece actually recently because, again, I was thinking a lot about my past, and I was thinking about how our generation is so almost involved with these like pastels and desaturated colors that I don't particularly connect with that often. This sort of like austerity that I don't necessarily know is earned in some ways. And
it's funny how a pastel is sort of austere.
Yeah.
Huh? It's very limiting. It's like you can
and
have
very
a little.
manicured, right? And so I wanted to write a piece that kind of celebrated sort of the brash colors we grew up with when we were still scraping our knees and being a little less moved by seriousness, sort of. But no, I don't think there's anything particular right now. If I had a bigger project I was working on, there probably would be, because like you said, you sort of need those variables set in place that kind of create whatever zone you're going to be working in. And right now I'm just doing a bunch of small things, so I'm not like concentrated in that way.
Part of me thinks when you start seeing that color again everywhere, it means that something is on the way and you're about to sort of go into that world again. Cool, I love that. Should we pour some water?
Sure.
Is that okay?
Yeah, all 5 glasses.
Yeah, I'll do them all. I'll do that thing they do with champagne where they just go over all the glasses. Okay. There you go. So I wanted to talk to you about the first essay in the book, Heart Museum. It's one I can almost never get through in one sitting. It is sort of this big, bright crash course in Durga. It's like this. It's miraculous. It's all of these moments and memories and images and sounds, and you zoom in and out really, really fast, and sort of. It's amazing to me. It actually reminded me of a Tobias Wolff story called Bullet in the Brain.
Oh, yeah.
Which is it's a story about a man who gets shot in a bank robbery, and it sort of describes all of the moments that leave him as the bullet travels.
Yeah, I love that story. Yeah, it's got a similar, like you said, zoom in, zoom out.
Totally.
Yeah.
But I think of these gatherings of sensory cues in your work as bouquets. They're sort of these like sumptuous, perfumed moments of language. You know, you talk about a family wedding dress being made of parachute silk, or the crook of an elbow, or you know, the shoulders in Basic Instinct being the sexy part. Like,
oh, right, yeah.
You know, all of these little details. And it's not a sparingly used device in your work, which I really like. So I guess I just wanted to, or in this essay, this is definitely kind of full of those sorts of beautiful references. So I guess I just wanted to hear a little bit about your choice of starting the book with Heart Museum and sort of your use of those sensory cues.
Yeah, I definitely, I used this book as an opportunity to sort of take advantage of all the ways when I'm writing a single essay for like a publication that I'm given a lot of parameters, if it's anything from word count or subject matter, or I'm very irritating for a lot of my editors because they like have to rein in all my tangents. Like I always feel like I give them a draft and they're there like lassoing me like, you know, in the right direction, because I tend to just speed off into the opposite direction.
Which I love.
I inevitably return, but when you have like a 500-word piece, it's
I'm going to take my earrings off. I think this is the problem. Okay.
okay.
We're good.
It might be
Sorry.
mine.
No, it's good. I
Okay.
think it's me.
So I really used this as it was one of the few times in my life where I really felt I was taking advantage of an opportunity fully. Initially, that essay was supposed to be a page. I had a whole section in my book proposal where I wanted to challenge myself to have sort of like Lydia Davis-inspired one-page essays on specific topics. And this one is still saved in my computer in my original like files under the one-page essay folder, but it turned out to be 93 pages or whatever. So
well over a third of the book.
So I really, exactly. So I really took advantage of that. And I think part of it too was that for me, I'm not a particularly rebellious person, and so I felt like someone was giving me an opportunity, my publisher and my editor, to really be me. And I thought, okay, let me see let's see if this is really what they mean,
Right.
And it was a really good exercise actually, and like kind of also being judicious about my tangents, but also honoring that there's something in there that's building part of something bigger, and it's like worth it to needle away at that stuff and figure out, okay, is this something I've been wanting to talk about and I haven't found a home for it, and this might be the place. But yeah, that essay kind of took on a life of its own, and sometimes when I'm reading from it, the strangest thing happens where I don't even remember writing certain parts of it.
Wow.
So something kind of took over, I think, and whatever that is, I hope it comes back at some point, because it really does feel magical, and I sometimes feel very lucky that happened too.
Absolutely.
Like I love that I was able to have an unconscious act happen while I was writing.
I feel like it's the perfect first essay for your first book, because in a lot of ways it feels like you're sort of laying the terms for what you are like going to make in perpetuity. Maybe I'm reading too much into it, but even the idea of a heart museum, I feel like I read that and I was like, oh, that's like my life. That's what I'm trying to build, is a heart museum,
I originally actually wanted to put it at the end of the book, and my editor was sort of like, you cannot do that to a reader.
Oh, yeah.
It's so inconsiderate. They read the whole book, and then suddenly they're faced with nearly 100 pages.
Yeah.
But actually, one of my other editors was the one who recommended that we put it first, and her reasoning was related to an author whose work I really love, and it's Hilton Als. And in White Girls, which is a collection of his essays, a lot of it is criticism. The first essay, Tris Tropique, is the most autobiographical one, and it's the longest one. And like you said, it sort of like sets the tone.
Yep.
It gets everyone in the room to like be breathing at the same beat, sort of. So it's a good way to kind of get everyone in your world, almost.
Absolutely. Oh, man, I love it so much. It's, I've really tried to read all 93 pages in one sitting before, and it's too much in the most beautiful way. I just feel flooded by Durga, which is so lovely. I was interested in, when I was reading this essay in particular, I sort of thought about, I guess the sort of, the sentimentality of including these details of the sort of sensitive parts of people's bodies, and a color in the corner of a painting that makes you realize, oh, I haven't seen all the colors in the world, the inside of a fruit. And there's something to me which is feminine about that detail. And I know in my work, I'm very sensory and very detail-oriented also, but it sort of is something that I maybe shy away from at times, because I think I'm at risk of over-feminizing my work, but it never seems like a concern with your work at all. I never feel that. Maybe that's just my own glitch that I have, but I'm curious.
No, it's definitely something that I've been insecure about. I never.
Oh, don't be. It's wonderful. I was just like interested in how.
Well, it is a kind of, there's an environment. I know when I first started writing in the first person or more personal essays, I had a lot of insecurity over the fact that it felt like there was a climate for nonfiction where unless you were arguing an idea, there was really no room for you. And I've always felt sort of insecure about what are my ideas and do I have much argumentative rhetoric in me naturally? And I don't necessarily. And so I've always been a bit nervous if maybe I'm too indulgent, or words that get thrown around a lot, especially with women writers, is maybe she's too precious, maybe she doesn't know how to edit out,
Oh, no. Well, it feels meticulous. It never feels like it needs an edit. It's very brave going into that much detail and harnessing that sentimentality. I think it's really beautiful.
Mining something without feeling like, mining something that I'm not sure necessarily has a huge point is a real challenge for me that I love. If I'm writing a film review, for instance, the part that really makes me feel insecure as a film critic is in the second paragraph. Usually your editor requires that summarize the film, and I avoid it at all costs. And I know I'm going to get the note. Sometimes I just send the draft in with a big TK to come. I promise I'll get to the plot, don't worry. And then I just phone in at the last minute because plot just doesn't interest me that much. Right now it doesn't, right? And so that kind of writing, it's more that it actually also bores me a little, and if I'm feeling a little bit bored or uninspired, I'm just not going to mind those corners of a painting or the stuff that really turns me on and makes me want to make art. But I think it also has to do with, again, with this project, I was given the opportunity to really tell my own story, and I didn't want to waste that by having all the voices in my head that come from exterior forces saying, this is what an essay is, this is what an argument is, this is how you conclude. I wanted to sort of really honor that there's another way to do it, and I've felt that and I've known it, and now someone's granted me sort of the opportunity, and I didn't want to waste it. So I think that was part of it too.
It's very sweet that you keep saying somebody has granted you the opportunity, but you did that to yourself. I need you to, I hope you know that. This is all you.
Yeah, I still, I guess, in my head that I needed, a whole, sort of a whole team to get me in the right place. Yeah. But yeah, it's true.
Yeah, no, and I think the ways in which you communicate plot, which are often these little vignettes, and the one that sticks out to me is you're getting ready for a friend's sort of party, and she's moved house and you don't know her address, and your partner at the time just says the address in this way that makes you think, huh? And it's just this tiny moment, and you say in the book that your intuition was there, but it's sort of all that you need, to communicate this whole time in your life, this whole that whole year-long end of a relationship or whatever, and I really respect that kind of narrative.
Having intuition as a writer is the greatest gift, but as a person in the world, it can make you very paranoid and jealous, and also feel almost in trouble for knowing before you can utter, having a feeling without proof. And the world requires proof so much, can make you feel insecure or that you are functioning at a different plane.
Absolutely. I have that too. And I think I always have this thing where I feel like I'll say the thing that I'm thinking and everyone's like, you're insane. And you give it 6 months to a year and that thing comes true. But it's I feel like my life is just these periods of limbo where nobody believes me.
Yeah, no one likes an I told you so, so then you just kind of have to... No, you can
never I told you so,
yeah, you can never I told you so. And also using words like feeling like you might have a psychic element to you or something can really turn people off. But what I've come to understand it as is I just think that there are certain people who are paying such close attention, and with that you can build a sense of prophetic knowing when really it's just you're paying attention and things happen in cycles and patterns, and so you just kind of are born knowing what might happen, but it's not so magical. It's just you're paying attention.
Yeah, I believe that and I remember you saying something to me about walking into a restaurant with somebody and knowing immediately that you're not going to be able. The light is not. You can't make this work.
Yeah, bad lighting can really ruin everything.
But that's almost. It's the same sort of train of thought. I'm the same. It's this overlying sensitivity that sort of makes the world very accessible to you all the time.
Yeah, and you
for
become
better or for
incredibly
worse.
sensitive, right?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. I wanted to talk about growing up in Montreal. You were born and raised in Montreal.
Yes.
Durga speaks French, which I think is very impressive. And we went for this walk the other day, and we were talking about sort of both being from somewhere which is not necessarily the place, and how, Durga has lived in New York for 10 years.
Yeah.
I've sort of spent a little bit of time there, but we both understand the feeling of being in the city that belongs to everyone and having, these close relationships with people that feel different to the ones that happen when you are at home sort of in that specific environment. And I guess I wanted to hear a little bit from you about that feeling, whether you think being from Montreal maybe informs your work at all, and just about life there and what it does for you as a creative.
Yeah, I definitely, one of the reasons why I moved back to Montreal was because I felt like I wanted to return to whatever original part of me hadn't yet been kind of affected by America or affected by certain tiers of privilege that I hadn't really encountered until I'd gone to college in the US. But also a lot of it was that I personally feel like what happens when you have a lot of artists in a city like New York is people stop telling the stories that are their weird, strange, beginnings. You kind of recycle certain interests, and part of me
curate much more.
You curate, exactly.
Sure.
You end up thinking about more what people will think of you than what you do at home alone that's weird, and that's what you should actually be writing about, right? And part of that too is that, growing up in Montreal, I was on student council and was an athlete and all these things that seem so plain, but
You're an athlete? What did you do?
Soccer, but I was
Soccer?
not good.
Oh my
Football,
gosh.
I don't know.
I love it.
Yeah, it was that part of me though where so much of that's in the book. You learn about your body, about other friends' mothers on the field. You learn about so many structures that could seem really plain, but when you write about it, that's how you perceive the world. Most of my book skips actually my 20s. A lot of it goes straight into my childhood and my parents, and so that was for me really formative, even though I didn't know then I wanted to be a writer. I think I was like every kid who was sort of creative but bad at math, so you thought, okay, I'll be like an architect,
Sure.
I think that was sort of the option, right?
Yes.
But I wanted to return to that time because even, meeting your friends here, I love a sort of insular environment that feels far away from the fray in some ways, because there's a comfortableness and a naturalness and people's pursuits. I almost trust them more. And I really miss that. And I do feel like living in New York informed a lot of my writing voice and who I read and who I let into my life, but I also really, really value the proximity to being around family and cousins. That's such a strange relationship, a cousin,
Sure.
you're
and doesn't really fit into somewhere like New York City.
Exactly. Yeah, I don't know anybody's cousins in New York,
Yes.
but I go home to Montreal and I'm meeting cousins' children, and that sort of relational stuff is really integral to my writing. I love how you can inherit a parent's gestures, not just, their looks. I love that, what you grew up eating, you'll eventually crave when you're sick and need to learn how to cook. For me, that's a form of writing. It's
Absolutely.
Writing is always about a return. So yeah, I do really feel lucky that I grew up in a city that is so peculiar in its way, and it feels like a city that's a work in progress. Whereas I feel like leaving New York wasn't as tragic as some might think because it always feels the same.
Sure.
It's relentless.
Yes.
You
And
know?
you come back and you're like, oh, they didn't miss me here.
Yeah.
Nothing, which is all kind of heartbreaking.
Montreal to me feels, I don't know if you relate to this when you come home, but Montreal to me feels like tonally what a residency should feel like, which is that you get...
Explain that.
Well, it's like you don't wake up and then have to join the rhythm of a city that's already started. You can choose how to deliberate on your day, and regardless if you have a job or commitments that you have to get to at whatever hour, it still feels completely intentional.
Right. Interesting.
And I just didn't always feel that way in New York. I started to only know one reality, and then I joined that reality, and then it was hard to kind of float up from it, you know? And in Montreal, I have this sense of the weekend or 4 p.m. on a Tuesday, you know?
I believe that too.
It's just really different. And one thing I always use as an example is I only developed an adult relationship with my parents through Christmas vacations because I was living away, right? And now I can go with my father to run errands, and I love that. You know, he's like always at the bank. I don't know what he's doing there. He's always going to the bank. And actually one day, before coming here, I was thinking, oh, I should get some currency. And I called him because I knew this would thrill him. And I was like, do you want to go to the bank? He's like, always.
Oh, this is where you got your currency that I won't let you spend. I'm like, get away from me.
Yeah,
with those notes.
exactly. Yeah, so I just feel sort of like that stuff is
Absolutely.
so storied for me. And I mean, I write about it in my book because even just thinking about the bank, like these tellers, these women who growing up were for me like a sort of model of womanhood too. Like, it's funny when you're a kid, you like associate a certain
fine gold chain.
Yeah,
associate
very
gold
put
chain.
together. There's a certain like caliber of woman. If they were stewardesses on a plane or tellers at the bank, there was
Sure.
like an elegance that I just didn't associate maybe to the women in my family. It was like
Right.
a different type of beauty, but you kind of put them on these pedestals and they had these jobs, and I feel like I'm returning now and kind of demystifying a lot of that, but still really enjoying that my imagination was not one of like, I'm going to write books that take place in far off lands, you know. I was like intrigued by the bank teller, and that's still kind of how I am now. So Montreal is definitely a huge part of that for me.
Yeah, it's so nice to feel luxury in those sort of small moments of home life.
Yep.
And I think I sense that in the book. You know, all of these small vignettes are treated as luxuries, and maybe that is because you went home to finish the book, and I wonder if you had been in New York, you would have treated them so sort of reverently, you know, or if they would have been quicker or, you know, more economical, you know.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, something as simple as when I was finishing the book, I don't know what it's like for you in the studio when you're getting right until the end, but you kind of hit this moment of delirium, right? Because you've committed to a project and you know it has to end, but you also don't want it to end, right? So you kind
But
of...
you want it to end more than anything in the
yeah,
world.
Yes, exactly,
Bit of both.
right?
Yeah.
And so to live in that tension is physically so strange. And my parents would drive over to my apartment with Tupperwares of food because they knew I wasn't cooking.
Oh.
And yeah, I don't know. There's something about, you know, them texting me, I'm trying to finish a book, being like, hey, can you return the Tupperware? It's like, it reminds you like, okay, like no matter how much you think you're finishing your first book, and it's like the whole world revolves around you,
We
they
need our
need
Tupperware
those
back.
recycled yogurt containers
Yes,
back.
yeah.
Like
yeah.
this isn't even like new Tupperware.
Totally.
This is like recycled yogurt containers. So, you know, like that is like, it's legitimizing in some ways too, because it's like you have to remember where you come from. That's really important to me. I feel strange about adult friendships I have where I don't know about my friend's family. Even, and it could be bad or good, but just if there's this complete cutoff and
Right.
someone has like Gatsby restarted their lives and
Yes.
it's really anonymous,
Yeah.
I find it suspicious, you
Right,
know,
yeah.
just a little bit.
I know what you mean.
So, yeah.
Yeah, that is a fascinating moment when you're just sort of, you're so alone when you're finishing something and you're in that period where there's going to be a thing. Like it's all laid out. You just need to kind of put the final bits in place. There's no mystery exactly about what you're doing. It's like probably the closest thing in our lives to like getting up and going to the office and like plugging it in and going home. I really felt that routine at that time. And we were in hotels a lot, but my mum's way of like taking care of me in that time would be going to Strand Books, and she'd be like, here's a book about Agnes Martin. I'd be like, oh, thank you. Lovely, like...
these little tokens of
very
inspiration
calm,
to keep
and
you
they're always
going,
like a
yeah.
very calm, like, you're so nice to just like look at some Agnes Martin when you're like so stressed out you think you're going to die, It's Tupperware adjacent, I think.
That's actually funny that you bring up Agnes Martin, because I remember something that I think we were texting each other around the same time, was Agnes Martin's work it seems so austere, it seems so plain to anyone just like maybe walking by really quickly or flipping through her work in a book. But one of her pieces, which is, I think maybe the color of this table with like just lines, is like
couple of lines.
It's really the least colorful of all of hers. It's called Fiesta, and I remember texting you that, being like, "This is everything that I love."
Yes,
it's like a title that kind of makes no sense, but
love
makes
Fiesta.
you pause and think, and like that sort of strange pairing is exactly that sweet spot that I love.
Absolutely.
That thing is called Fiesta is just brilliant to me.
Yeah, so I remember did you see that show in New York?
Yeah, at the Guggenheim, yeah.
Right, so I saw it at LACMA, and that was like one of the most moving shows that I've been to in a long time. It was that big retrospective of her work, and it was, I really like the retrospectives at LACMA. I went to a Larry Salton one there. I don't know if you're familiar with Larry Salton. He's a photographer from California, but I bought the book from the show, and the book was laid out exactly like the rooms, like the chronological order that you like walked through the rooms, which is such a beautiful book to have because you really remember that kind of physical experience. But I remember with the Agnes Martin show, I have this like sensory memory of there being like lots of windows open and natural light and like curtains. Obviously it's LACMA. There weren't a bunch of like curtains blowing or anything.
Yeah.
There's no curtains, but it felt so, it felt like we were outdoors.
Oh, okay,
and you see these works, and I highly recommend you checking out Agnes Martin's work if you aren't familiar with it. It is so beautiful, but it really is these sort of collections of lines, and it's very simple, but they are so moving. And for me, I found, I walked into, there's a lot of sort of like grey and brown and sort of pencil colours and things. And then I turned a corner and there was pink. And it was such a revelation. I was like, and just the gift of being denied that colour previously in the exhibit, and then, being gifted it in such a revelatory way. I remember thinking about that when I was reading this recently. I was like, that can be a revelation sometimes, something like that.
Totally.
And
an artist like her, she was such a stalwart, and like her advice to other artists, there's something about her that some artists, visual artists, feel naturally very literary to me, and she's one of them.
Absolutely.
And so much of my writing process is like not writing and just looking, and hopefully it'll end up on my screen, you know? And she's someone who really inspires that in me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, she's amazing. What do I want to ask you, Durga? I always want to, I'm always interested about sort of visual stuff, especially, you are such a visual person. You're so visual, I'm almost surprised that you ended up writing, except that you're so good at it, it obviously makes sense, but...
There's really nothing else I can do, so...
But I don't think I've ever met a writer, or many people, as visual as you are, and you have such an extensive knowledge of film. We were talking about Polly Platt last night, who is a production designer that Durga is really inspired by, and that it really made me realize, like, I'm sure a lot of writers, like, obviously I'm interested in like what you were reading at the time or what you're reading right now, or what, informs your work or whatever, but I realized when you were talking about Polly Platt, it's probably like production designers and photographers and stuff, right?
It totally is. It's
Is that
the
a lame
behind-the-scenes
question, the
No.
influences question? I'm just so curious because your
No.
style is so specific.
Structured in that way, it's a very great question because it isn't what writers inspire me. Polly Platt is the woman whom I quote at the beginning of my book. She was a production designer, and she's one of my heroes. I feel weird saying
No,
the word
it's
hero.
fine. It was great.
She's
We were
one
in
of my
in a
heroes.
restaurant last night. It was very loud. And you
Yeah,
were talking about-
she's definitely someone who has inspired my writing despite not being a writer. And a huge part of it is that her job, was production designing these movies, but having kind of the most elaborate instinct to turn off a light on like a gas station sign to show that this Texas town is like down and out, like these like little touches that become like film iconography. And I really admire people like that. Whenever I'm interviewing like a director or something, the question I always ask is like, how do you communicate your instincts to a team? And then how do you make them believe you without it being some like guru cult version of it? Like how do you get people to trust that you are up to something? I've always really admired people who can do it, and Polly Platt was definitely one of them. And the quote that opens my book by her is, she production designed The Witches of Eastwick, and she just had a vision of Jack Nicholson with a pink balloon. And
Wow.
if anyone's seen that movie, there's this incredible scene with balloons, and I love that a little seed can then become this image that changes people's lives, So yeah, she's definitely someone whose work I return to, especially when I'm feeling very frustrated, but I know there's something there. I remember that that's part of being an artist. That's actually the work. That's the project. Is no one else is going to have that instinct. And if you can't make it happen, then what's the point? So if it's by getting so good at it that you become unimpeachable, or if it's about finding a way to carve out a space for yourself to make that work happen. It's definitely people like Polly Platt. And I love the behind the scenes people. Film is so different than writing because it's so inherently collaborative, right? And it takes so many people to make a single moving image, right?
It horrifies me to think of how many people your vision has to like funnel through.
Exactly.
Isn't that terrifying?
I
Thank
mean,
God we just get to like...
Yeah, exactly.
It's just...
I mean, even working on my cover, I felt like I had to involve other people, and that was sort
Very
of like
stressful.
nightmarish to communicate exactly what I wanted, but also respecting that other people have their expertise and that you should trust those as well. Like that sort of tug is tricky for me. So I really admire cinematographers, for example. They have a sort of sixth sense for light.
Sure.
And they have to communicate that on screen, but they also have to communicate it to everyone around them that they're up to something. And that kind of skill that's so strong, but in a way humble, because it's not like the director or something or the star. I love that balance in a creative person. I love editors in film and in writing, that like behind the scenes touch that is so strong. I really admire that.
Yeah, I actually saw something that Tavi, our mutual friend Tavi Givenson, posted today about the Virgin Suicides, and it was a quote from Sofia Coppola, and she said that her father had said to her, make sure you know what the essence of this thing that you are making is, to the point where you can distill it down to one word, because you are going to be asked all of these questions like, what sweater are they going to wear, and like, why should it be at this time of day? And if you know that, everything will become instinct. And so her, she was making the Virgin Suicides at the time, and her word was loss. And it's so beautiful to think of her being like, okay, this top, lost, like, of it channeling, but it's so true, like, you just need that one word.
That's really great advice.
Yeah, I thought so.
That's great advice.
When you were talking about Polly Platt, and that it made me think of Gregory Crewdson, who you mention in the book as well, and it seems like he had that similar, he's an American photographer, and he will sort of construct these big kind of real life scenes, but that are incredibly constructed, and he will, you see him walk like 200 yards and just dim a light slightly, or make sure that this woman in this diner far off in the corner knows exactly what she's thinking, which I think is such a gorgeous
He's really
way of making
cinematic,
work.
and what he does that I think is great is he creates the real that looks artificial, which is really attractive to me.
Totally.
And what you were just saying about Gregory Crewdson photography, how he'll have like a house with like just one light on, and it's like the kitchen light, which is always somehow sinister. I don't know why. Like the kitchen light on at night, there's something dark about it. But I was rereading this this book of mine that I brought with me on this trip, and it's a philosophy book, but it's called The Poetics of Space, and the writer quotes this moment that. I can't believe I'm going to be talking about like Rilke here, but anyways.
Oh my gosh, I love it.
It goes this moment of three friends walking in a field, and they see a house far away in the night, and a light is on. And even though this writer is with two other people, each person in that moment seeing that light in that house, they suddenly feel tremendously alone. And that's what I love about experiencing art. You'll be in a museum around so many people, and something about a color in a painting will suddenly make you feel completely alone. And or you'll be at the movie. I mean, the movies is a perfect example. You're there in a packed room, and you're connecting with a huge screen, and you can feel completely alone. And I mean alone in the best way. Like you are a person on your path, and you're connecting with something in a room full of other people. And Crewdson's photography does that to me too. It's like that really fine level of spookiness that I really relate to.
Totally. Yeah, I love that. What did you bring here to read, by the way? I'm curious to, what people pack for this side of the world, because it's so, you must sort of feel like you're like in space right now, right?
It's strange. I've adapted quite
Very
well.
fun. She's adapted amazingly. I'm so impressed.
I don't know. The only times I feel like I'm very far from what I know is obviously the time difference thing. In fact, the strangest...
It's yesterday over there, which is
yesterday, but we're behind because we slept through an entire day of things, So I woke up this morning and I was texting someone, and it was that strange feeling where you're in the future, whatever that means, but you slept through crazy things happening in the world, so you're behind. I've never felt ahead and behind at the same time. So I'm like playing catch up, but I feel like lazy because I'm playing catch up because I just slept through it all. So it's like, is it even worth being in the future if you're missing out? I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I mean, on this very
strange.
practical level, we get, everything comes out, all the albums come out first here.
Oh,
so it's
okay,
this, you really do feel like you're right on the edge of this great thing.
I was actually going to ask you that about dates, right?
Talk to me.
So some things, this is going to make me sound really silly in
I
a
love
room
it.
full of a lot of witnesses.
Bring it in.
But if something happens on a date somewhere else, but you're experiencing it the next day, which date are you experiencing it on here?
Well...
Does that make sense to everybody?
No. Yes. Maybe people will tell you at the
because
the sliding table.
a good example because it seems to have consumed a lot of people's interest is this royal wedding, right?
Oh,
so
yeah.
that's happening on today.
Yeah. Well, yes, the day before.
But what date do you commemorate? Okay, you commemorate it on the day it's
you
happening.
would say
I
the
don't want
date,
to
I
work this out in
guess.
front of so many people.
Yeah, this is
I'm sorry, but see, this is what I mean. Like you're ahead.
This is what
but
happens
you're,
when two friends
I know.
do this.
This is
I
why
was scared that we would start talking about boyfriends. I just was like,
no, this
we've
is
got
probably
this
very
we
interesting
have
to everybody.
No,
Keep it professional. Okay, we can move away from the time conversation.
Okay.
Sorry.
No, it is confusing, and it is kind of it is like space. I actually I really want to visit Antarctica because to me, living down here, you really are right on the edge. But that other step. I think that's as close as you can get to being in space on Earth. And I think that will be really creatively sort of cleansing or settling, or will kind of show me something in some way.
Do you feel when you're working on whatever project it is you're working on, do you find you benefit from isolation more or benefit from kind of regularly convening with the world or having a few people that are your orbit that kind of make you recirculate the air and share the ideas that are important to you?
That's a good question. I think, I mean, I don't know if I do necessarily benefit from isolation. I think my ideal way of working is being in a city where I have 5 friends and work. And so, like, 2 are going to be available at any given time. Maybe 1 if your hours are like 4 till, I don't know, midnight, like mine are. So I like that feeling of being around, but being incredibly isolated and knowing there really are only like 2 people that I could call right now. You know, that's the kind of isolation I'm into. Yeah, so around the time we were going to get our auras read, I was living in Midtown in New York, which is, we've talked about, like a bizarre place to choose. It's like no one chooses to spend any amount of time in Midtown, but it did have that quite isolated feeling, even though you're sort of in the throngs, like no one I knew was there, and in that way, you almost don't see any faces at all. You know, you just have I would walk to the train, and from the train to the studio, and it would all be on this little loop. I think having a little loop is really important for when you're making something. If you just have this small track that you sort of follow every day, I find that I find the isolation of that very helpful.
Yeah, actually, one thing that I remembered texting you when I was finishing my book was the strangest thing happens when you're really consumed by whatever project you're working on, if it's like a book or an album, where you become so under the influence of it. But when it's winding down, I remember texting you, and I was like feeling kind of sad because I was riding the subway in New York when I was like back in New York for a second, I think, to meet with my editors, and you almost feel like you're becoming invisible. And I just wanted to shake a stranger on the subway and be like, I'm here, I exist, because can you see me? Because I know I'm so real right now, but I've been so involved in this thing that I haven't been sharing with anyone. And the process of working on something that only maybe 5 or so people have looked at, but has been your whole world for for a couple of years, you start to feel like you're becoming invisible.
Yes.
You know?
I actually remember writing that in the thing I wrote when I turned 20. I was sitting on the subway and I remember writing, "Can you see me?" Like, because it really is that feeling.
Yeah, it's sad because you want to be able to know that you've done something that's going to actually help you and enable you to participate in the world. But strangely, it's made you feel like you've regressed into some behind-the-scenes territory. Yeah. And how to get to the front is
like
tricky.
when the elevator opens in the Truman Show and you see like TV.
Exactly.
But it's kind of a nice time, and it's always finite. I think we need to like get better at enjoying living in that time, because it always goes away, and sometimes you wish for it back.
Oh, totally. Totally.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you something which I don't know if there's even an answer for necessarily, but when I think about my work and my sort of practice and the things that I am trying to build, I'm always thinking of this eventual like nirvana or like paradise where my work will be occupying the exact space that I want it to be, whether that's just in my brain or like out in the world. And I wondered, like, I feel like I need to read how I guess I wanted to know like what your dream is for your work, all your work, not just right now, but always. Is there some space you one day wish to occupy, or something that you're marching towards, or are you there? Do you feel that you're there?
Yeah.
Is that a weird question?
No, it's not. I think it's a question that I think more writers would benefit from being asked more regularly. Not that one needs like a long con,
No, not at all.
But I think to see your work as something that can tumble into other work is really helpful. I definitely, one thing that I've never taken to is you can only be one kind of writer or one kind of artist. And one opportunity with this book is that it's opened up to me the strangest opportunities that are completely unrelated to writing, you know? And my hope is that that keeps happening. I hope that whatever writing I do, it unlocks opportunities that I assumed were unavailable to me. I was in Stockholm last month speaking at an architecture and design museum, and I know pretty much nothing about it, but the curator really wanted me there to talk based on my book. And when I got on the phone with him to talk about it, I realized why is because how he interpreted my book as this curator was all about spatial awareness in rooms and interior spaces, which is true. It's a huge preoccupation of mine.
You're very form-oriented, actually.
Yes,
now
and he got that, and I just didn't. It wasn't as obvious to me, and I had to write this talk and go present it to an audience that was in large part, you know, architects and graphic designers and people just really technical. And I was anxious about how could I convince them of my worth here. And the moment I shed that and just wrote this long talk about painters and the writing process and how it all intersects, I realized how lucky I was in some ways to get this opportunity. And so I guess for me, I just hope that writing becomes this kind of tool that keeps me traveling and meeting people and working in various mediums too, you know. I've had friends say, oh, you know, this is how you write, maybe you should go more into scripts or whatever. And I used to feel like, oh no, I can't. And now I see it more like if someone else has interpreted that from what my writing can do, then I should pause and think about it a bit more. It's encouraged me in some ways to learn exactly when to say no to things, and in other ways it's really encouraged me to kind of like cock my head to the side and be like, okay, maybe. And that's really exciting for me. So yeah, I don't know. I don't ever see some like big plan.
That's a beautiful dream to have for your work, though, just that it is something that is always taking on new forms and kind of moving in that way. If you ever want to be a production designer.
I mean,
in one of my, come to me.
I mean, that's the other thing too, is like you learn, through writing, I've learned qualities that I've probably had most of my life but didn't know how to harness. Like other people saying, oh, you're a really visual person, or the sonic like dial of a room clearly affects you. It gives you an opportunity to read the world, but it also has given the world an opportunity to read me and see things that I might not otherwise be so available to. So it's just honestly just been a great way to have conversations and meet people that I would otherwise never meet, which is incredible.
Thank you so much for coming to see Durga talk. I feel like I learned so much about you today. Everyone, thank you. That was really good.
Thank you.